It started the night before. He didn't sleep. None of them really did. But he didn't even try. He walked the perimeter of the camp alone. The desert was dry and silent, stretching forever in every direction, like the edge of the world. One cigarette after another. No words. Just the wind and the weight in his chest. In his pocket. The final calculations. He knew the numbers by heart. He hated that he did. A flash might ignite the atmosphere. That was one theory. Not likely, but not impossible. The odds were low. Low wasn't zero. And if it worked, if the fireball formed and held and roared into the sky like a new sun, then what? He looked up at the stars. Not for answers. For scale. Even the cosmos looked smaller now. He wasn't praying. He didn't believe in gods. But in that hour, with sand grinding in his teeth and the world holding its breath, he felt like he was standing in front of one. Flash cut. His hand, trembling, presses a paper down under a desk lamp. A number circled in. Red. Cut. Someone hands out goggles. Cut. The bomb, resting like something asleep, waiting to be named. Cut. A man vomiting in the dark behind a truck. Cut. The countdown begins. 10. And now. 5:30 in the morning. July 16th, 1945. Silence. Not the cinematic kind. Not orchestral silence. Real silence. Thick, dry, desert-baked. No sound. No movement. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, his voice. Quiet. Flat. No echo. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. No one replied. There was no music, no scream, no dramatic score, just a flash, white, vicious, colorless, the kind of light that doesn't shine. It erases. The desert exploded. Fire bloomed upward like a god vomiting light. The sky tore open. The air howled like it was dying. Shadows were cast that would outlive the people who made them. And still, he stood. No goggles, no shield. Just Robert Oppenheimer. Thin, wrinkled suit, hollow-eyed, motionless. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't breathe. No victory. No fear. Just the slow realization settling across his face like fallout. It worked. And in that moment, the world changed shape. That man, a scientist, a poet, a paradox in a cheap tie, had forced the universe to show its teeth. And it did. He hadn't built the bomb to kill people. That wasn't the game. He wanted to understand, to unlock the deepest lock the universe had ever made, to break the atom like a riddle. But what he found wasn't elegance. It wasn't beauty. It was fire. Fire without a master. Fire without a soul. He thought he could control it. He was wrong, because the danger wasn't in the bomb. It wasn't even in the math. It was in us. He had believed, truly, that knowledge made us better, that when you show people truth, they rise. But the truth didn't save anyone. It erased them. Hiroshima hadn't happened yet, but in his bones, he already felt the ash. This story didn't start with a bomb. It started with an idea, that the universe had rules, that the mind could reach them, that knowing them would light the way forward. But no one warned him what happens when you shine that light on something that wants to stay in the dark. He wanted to understand the world. Instead, he changed it, because once you see the flash, you can't unsee it. And he saw it first. America in the 1920s looked like it had won something permanent. The war was over. Factories hummed. Jazz spilled from open windows. Men in hats read newspapers and believed the headlines. Science was for making toasters and bridges, not unraveling the soul of the universe. People believed in progress, the safe kind. Neat, patriotic, monetizable. They feared radicals, foreigners, intellectuals who talked too much. Anything that made the ground under their picket fences feel less solid. And into that picture walked a 20-year-old with bones like wire and eyes like razors. He didn't belong, and he didn't pretend to. Robert Oppenheimer wasn't built for porch swings and baseball. He was built for staring too long at the dark and asking why it wasn't blinking back. At Harvard, he read more than he ate. He memorized entire poems in Sanskrit, then skipped lunch to sit under a tree and write letters home like this. Mother, I walked for 4 hours today. The hills were burning with silence. I think maybe I understand the sadness in light. Everything that shines is also breaking. His parents didn't know what to do with that. His classmates didn't either. They drank, danced, rushed fraternities. He sat in a corner with Proust in one hand and a cigarette in the other, whispering lines from the Upanishads to no one in particular. In physics class, he didn't raise his hand. He rewrote the question. He once stood at the front of a lecture hall with a chalkboard full of dense math, looked out at 100 blank stares, and said, "An electron isn't where you think it is. It's everywhere it might be. Until you look, then it picks." A kid in the back muttered, "That's bullshit." A professor shook his head. "That's not physics. That's poetry." Oppenheimer stared at the board and replied, without turning, "And maybe the universe is written in poems. Maybe your math just hasn't caught up yet." The room didn't know whether to laugh or leave. He wasn't trying to shock anyone. He was just done pretending the world made sense when it didn't. He learned early. Being smart didn't make you safe. It made you a target. He was too intense, too serious, too strange. One professor quietly warned another. Oppenheimer is brilliant, but he doesn't blink. He unnerves the others. He was put on probation once, not for cheating, not for failing, for being uncooperative with community standards, which was code for he made people uncomfortable, because he asked things people weren't trained to ask. What if reality doesn't exist until we look at it? What if light is both particle and wave, but only because we're asking the wrong question? What if time isn't real? This wasn't the kind of science America wanted. They wanted heroes, inventors, businessmen in lab coats. Oppenheimer gave them paradoxes wrapped in metaphors. He said the universe was chaos with good manners, that if you stripped away the illusion, all that remained was vibration, possibility, and maybe nothing at all. To most of America, that sounded like communism, or witchcraft, or a nervous breakdown. But to him, it was sanity. It was survival. He didn't want to be a prophet. He just couldn't stop seeing cracks in the walls everyone else called truth. And in a decade that demanded faith in machines and order, he became a preacher of uncertainty. The world before him was solid, predictable, labeled. Then he showed up and whispered, "What if everything you believe is just a comfort story? What if the ground you're standing on is smoke? What if your laws don't apply?" And the worst part, he wasn't being dramatic. He was being accurate. He was 24 when it happened. It wasn't theory. It wasn't one of his abstract thought games. It was a real apple, laced with real poison, left quietly, deliberately, on the desk of his professor. The man had humiliated him in front of a room full of peers, dismissed his work, mocked his methods. Oppenheimer didn't shout. He didn't argue. He waited. Then, later calmly, like adjusting an equation, he took action. When they caught it, the apple untouched but discovered, there was no panic in him. "I didn't want to kill him," he said. "I just wanted him gone." He wasn't being dramatic. He was being precise, because it wasn't about revenge. It was about control. He lived in a world where atoms blinked in and out of certainty, where reality was a probability cloud, where nothing, not even the self, could be trusted to hold still. And in that chaos, he wanted something absolute, even if it was just one man disappearing. He wasn't a psychopath. He was just someone whose thoughts had no brakes. A favor here, a whisper there, and the whole thing disappeared. The professor recovered. The apple was forgotten, but he wasn't. From that moment on, people stopped treating Robert like a brilliant student. They started treating him like a loaded weapon. He transferred to Berkeley. By 30, he'd already reshaped how American physics looked at the atom. He knew, with terrifying clarity, that reality didn't behave. Particles changed when you looked at them. Time bent under gravity. The world wasn't solid. It twitched, it shivered, and he could feel it, constantly. He didn't walk into rooms. He unsettled them. He'd stand at a blackboard, eyes unfocused, fingers twitching, speaking in riddles that made sense hours later. If at all. He wasn't trying to be better than everyone else. He just was. Even Einstein noticed. After a brief walk with Robert on campus one foggy morning, he came back to his office and closed the door, then, softly, to a colleague. "Robert, frightens me. People like that. They see too much, and they never sleep well." Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, and suddenly, the world didn't want philosophers. It wanted weapons. The Germans were racing toward the bomb. He knew it. He had read the papers, felt the tremor in the letters from colleagues in Europe. Theoretical physics had become a battlefield. Then came the knock. A military man. Square face. Steely posture. He didn't sit. He didn't waste time. "We need your mind," he said. "Now." Oppenheimer lit a cigarette. Dragged. Exhaled through his nose. "And my conscience." The officer blinked once. "You're saving a country, and something worse if you don't." The room was quiet. For a long moment, Robert looked past him. Through the wall, into something only he could see. Then he nodded. He didn't do it for the flag, or revenge. He did it for the idea. Because truth, once glimpsed, demands embodiment. Because someone was going to tear the atom apart. And if it had to, happen. Let it be through hands that understood what it meant. It wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. He already knew the price. He would build the bomb. He would open the lock. He would be the one to hold the match. Better that, he thought, than to pretend the fire wasn't coming. Oppenheimer didn't salute, didn't chant, didn't give a damn about flags. He didn't believe in countries. He believed in constants. He saw nations as temporary accidents, fragile, flammable, mostly noise. But physics was eternal. He didn't serve the military. He served the atom. That was his loyalty. Not to generals, not to presidents, but to the raw scaffolding of existence, to numbers that didn't lie, to forces that didn't vote, to the invisible architecture beneath everything. When a journalist asked him why he agreed to build a bomb that could vaporize a city in under a second, he didn't hesitate. "Because if I can understand it," he said, "then I have to. And if someone dumber, someone colder, someone who won't stop to think understands it before me, then we're already dead." It wasn't theater. He didn't dramatize. He just saw the timeline too clearly. He knew what was coming. At the heart of the atom was something infinite, not as metaphor, as fact. Inside every speck of matter, enough energy to crack the sky, and most people didn't even know it was there. But he did, and that meant responsibility. He didn't dream of mushroom clouds. He dreamt of formulas that might hold the future together. Equations as cages. Cages to hold back the monster that was waking. He knew you couldn't make a perfect one. Once you touched the power, it touched you back. Once you cracked the atom, it cracked you too. One night in Los Alamos, under sodium lights and cigarette smoke, another scientist stopped him in the hallway. The man was pale, shaken. He'd been running simulations. "If we build it," he asked, "and it destroys everything, what then?" Oppenheimer didn't blink. "Then we build it better. Not weaker. Not slower. Just more precise." The man stared at him. "But what if the universe isn't meant to be split?" Oppenheimer smiled. but it wasn't warmth. The universe doesn't care what it's meant for. It only cares what you understand, and what you don't. He wasn't cold. He just wasn't naive. Every night, after calculations, he read from the Bhagavad Gita, not for peace, for alignment. He didn't believe in commandments. He believed in karma, in action without attachment. You have the right to the work, not to the fruit of the work. He repeated that line to himself as he stared at the blast chamber blueprints. It wasn't permission. It was a warning. The more he understood, the clearer it became. You couldn't stop what was coming, but you could shape it, guide it, aim it. Or at least try. He wasn't building a bomb. He was racing the worst version of the future, not out of pride, out of fear. A fear so sharp it became vision. He didn't think he was the best man for the job. He just thought he might be the last one who cared what the job did to him. Los Alamos wasn't on the map. That wasn't an oversight. That was the whole point. It was built from scratch in the middle of the New Mexico desert, a skeleton town made of barbed wire, classified memos, and brain power the world had never concentrated in one place before. No street signs, no addresses, just fences, checkpoints, and the smartest, most unstable minds on Earth pulled together under one directive: beat Hitler to the bomb. It looked like a summer camp for geniuses and ghosts. Scientists biked between labs. Kids played baseball next to barracks where their parents were figuring out how to unmake cities. Casseroles in the oven. Plutonium in the glove box. Nightmares in the desert wind. And in the center of it all, like gravity wrapped in skin, was Robert Oppenheimer. He wasn't the top physicist. He wasn't a manager. But when he walked into a room, equations quieted. Conversations shifted. He didn't lead like a general. He conducted. Like a man hearing music others couldn't. But the music was brutal. He slept maybe 3 hours a night, if that. He smoked through the sunrise. He recited the Bhagavad Gita while the others talked about critical mass. He skipped meals, forgot birthdays. His wife, Kitty, once threw a coffee mug at the wall, screaming, "You married the bomb, not me!" He didn't answer. He just lit another cigarette and left. That night, their son Peter coughed himself awake. Oppenheimer didn't hear it. He was down the hall, sketching neutron paths in pencil on the back of classified memos. People cracked around him. Enrico Fermi, calm and rational, once pulled him aside. "You talk like we're controlling this," he said. "But what if we're not?" Oppenheimer stared at him, exhausted. "If we're not," he said, "then it matters even more that it's us, and not someone else." The pressure was apocalyptic. One physicist, a kid from Chicago named Kaplan, walked into Oppenheimer's office one morning, pale, shaking, holding his ID. "I'm done," he said. "I'm out. I can't build something I'd never survive using." Oppenheimer didn't shout, didn't beg. He closed the door, lit a match, and looked at him. "You think leaving makes you clean?" "I think staying makes me a coward." Oppenheimer exhaled smoke. "Cowards run, monsters build. But the worst thing," he leaned closer, "spectators. They watch, and then pretend they didn't." Kaplan didn't quit. No one did. Not really. At one early meeting, a bright-eyed postdoc cracked a joke about getting his name in the papers. Oppenheimer cut him mid-laugh. "If you're here to be famous," he said, dead quiet, "leave now. We're not working on a project. We're gambling with the end of time." No one laughed after that. Still, Los Alamos had rhythms, poker games, cheap whiskey, desert parties that felt like funerals with jazz. People tried to dance the dread out of their bones. One night, after a particularly brutal failure in testing, someone raised a glass at a party. "To Robert, we're saving the world." Oppenheimer clinked his glass, didn't smile, and said, "No, we're writing its epitaph, just with better handwriting than anyone else." Then he downed the whiskey and left before the laughter even started. He didn't celebrate breakthroughs. He autopsied them. Every equation wasn't progress. It was a countdown. And the scariest part? They were ahead of schedule. July 16th, 1945, 5:29 a.m., New Mexico. A spot so remote it barely had a name. The desert didn't breathe. The sky hung low, waiting. They called it Trinity, a name that sounded like hope, scripture, finality. It wasn't science anymore. It was ritual. When you're about to break the world in half, you give it a holy name. Makes the horror easier to swallow. Scientists in bunkers, soldiers in trenches, goggles strapped tight, hands clenched, prayers mumbled through dry throats. Someone vomited. Someone kissed a photograph. Someone forgot to breathe. Oppenheimer stood alone. No helmet, no goggles, just a cigarette in one hand and fate in the other. He didn't want protection. He wanted to witness. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a builder anymore. He was the trigger. And then, light. No sound. No warning. Just a rupture in the universe. Brighter than the sun. Brighter than sense. A colorless scream, pure and unforgiving, lit up the mountains like a god waking up angry. The shockwave came, after. A howl of air and fury. Sand turned to glass. Metal warped. The ground shifted. Some fell. Some cheered. A physicist laughed until he wept. Another dropped to his knees and started muttering equations like a prayer. Oppenheimer didn't move, didn't flinch, just whispered, like naming a ghost. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. No emotion, no pride, just acceptance. It worked. The test was a success. That was the word they used. Success. But that night, he didn't sleep. He lay on a cot in his barracks, staring at the ceiling, replaying the flash in his skull. Not the light, the silence after. 3 weeks later, Hiroshima. Then Nagasaki. No countdown this time. No goggles. Just 2 cities gone. 1 second, life. The next, shadows fused to pavement. Children turned to vapor mid-step. Mothers holding nothing. Skin falling off bone like old paper. We cut to a single image. A girl, maybe 8, burned black, still alive. Standing in the rubble, holding a metal lunchbox, melted into her hand. Not screaming, just staring. Back in America, the newspapers cheered. Victory. Justice. The end of the war. At Los Alamos, someone popped champagne. Someone else shot himself. Fermi didn't speak for 2 days. A young lab assistant fainted reading the casualty numbers. Another physicist threw up when he saw the first photo. And Oppenheimer, he went quiet. At a press event, a journalist asked the question that hung over everything. What do you feel, knowing what you created, did this? He didn't blink. Shame, he said, but not for what we did, for being right. Because deep down, he'd known. From the first equation, from the first flash of intuition. This wasn't just unlocking the atom. It was unlocking something no one could close again. The war ended, but something else began. He had reached into the heart of matter and pulled out a mirror. And what he saw wasn't truth. It was us. The war ended. Flags waved, parades rolled, history exhaled. And then they turned to Oppenheimer and said, "Thanks. You can go now." But he didn't go. He did the one thing they never expected. He kept talking about fear, about guilt, about how winning doesn't mean surviving. He flew to D.C., spoke to Congress, spoke to generals, spoke to people who hated hearing things they couldn't unhear. He told them, flat out, nuclear weapons are not security. They're suicide made scalable. We have not created peace. We have delayed extinction. If we keep building, someone will use it. Maybe not today, but someday. They didn't want a conscience. They wanted silence. The same men who once toasted him in private rooms now called him unreliable, a liability, a risk. They unsealed files, tapped his phone, dug through college essays, old letters, dinner conversations. Friends stopped picking up. Colleagues crossed the street. Even Hans Bethe, who had once stood beside him in the desert, warned, "You keep saying these things, Robert. They'll bury you." Oppenheimer just lit a cigarette and said, "I know. I just hoped they'd at least swallow first." Then came the hearings. April 1954. A room with no windows and too many pens. He sat for 4 straight days under oath, interrogated about his past, his politics, his thoughts, not what he built, what he believed. He told the truth, again, like always, and they used it to hang him without a rope. The AEC denied him his clearance. The man who once had every secret in the U.S. government was now declared a security threat. Officially, publicly, permanently. His name wasn't redacted. It was erased. 1 week later, he stood before a crowd at MIT at what would be one of his last public lectures. He didn't talk about atoms. He talked about silence. We have created something that speaks louder than any philosophy, any religion, any theory, and now it waits. It waits for us to grow wise, or for us to disappear. There was no applause, only quiet. A few months later, he tried to submit a document, a joint proposal with Niels Bohr, urging global nuclear regulation. It was blocked by a man who used to call him a patriot of the mind. His wife told him, "They used you like a scalpel, and then threw you out with the trash." He nodded, didn't argue, just said, "I was never the scalpel. I was the hand, and now the hand's gone. The blade is still out there." And it was. Missiles, doctrines, red buttons in suitcases, bombers in the sky. His physics didn't vanish. It metastasized. He gave the world a mirror. It saw fire and called it strength. He was never given a medal or a proper apology. His legacy wasn't a statue, it was a fuse, still burning, still waiting, still one wrong move away. And the man who lit it. He watched from a quiet house near the ocean, reading Sanskrit, smoking, and wondering if anyone had learned a single goddamn thing. Oppenheimer died in 1967, throat cancer. He could recite Sanskrit, decode the atom, predict the annihilation of cities, but he couldn't beat the slow gray rot of cells turning against him. In the end, it wasn't the bomb that killed him, not the hearings, not the silence. It was the cigarettes, the only thing he couldn't calculate his way out of. But he didn't vanish. Not really. He left behind no machine, no temple, no final theory carved in stone. What he left was a mirror. Cold, honest, close, the kind you avoid eye contact with at 3 a.m., the kind that doesn't show your face, but your shadow. And in that mirror, you don't see Oppenheimer. You see you, your hunger, your need to know. That twitch in your brain that whispers, "Go further, just a little more, even if it burns." That's the part he spoke to, not the polite, curious part, the obsessive one, the reckless one, the one that wants to look at the sun and understand why it shines. He proved something we pretend isn't true. That knowledge doesn't always heal. Sometimes it wounds. Sometimes it incinerates. He chased the truth like it owed him something, and it paid him back in ash. But still, he looked. One afternoon, not long before he died, he sat alone on the porch of his home in Princeton. His hand trembled slightly as he lit another cigarette. A young physics student, visiting for an afternoon, watched him. Nervous, respectful, a little awed. The student finally asked, "Dr. Oppenheimer, was it worth it?" Oppenheimer didn't answer right away. He stared out at the trees, the smoke curling around his thin fingers. Then he turned, looked the boy in the eye, and said softly, "You think it's knowledge? but it's a choice. A long silence. Then, with a voice dry as paper, "And once you choose, it's already too late." He smiled, just barely. The kind of smile you give when the joke's on you. Later that night, he woke from a dream he couldn't explain. He remembered being 7, reading a poem out loud in his father's library. The rhythm had felt beautiful, but somewhere in the lines, he didn't know why, his chest got tight, his throat went dry. He wanted to cry, but didn't know for what. It was his first encounter with beauty that terrified him, and maybe that was the whole story. The man who found terror in beauty and kept going anyway. That's the lesson, if you're still looking for one. Not that science is dangerous, not that governments lie, not even that power corrupts, but this: ideas have weight, and if you dare to carry one, you better be strong enough not to drop it. He thought he was. Maybe he was. But even he, with all his genius, his will, his control, still paid. The lesson isn't don't go looking, it's know what you're looking for, and understand, when it finally looks back at you, you might be the one who blinks. You think this was history, the 1940s, war, bombs, presidents, old black and white footage with crackling voiceovers and men in hats. You think it's distant, safe, done, but it's not. Cut. A neon-lit lab in Silicon Valley. A screen flickers. A cursor blinks. A young coder stares at the monitor, fingers dancing, headphones on, fueled by coffee, ambition, and that same old idea. I just want to understand. Cut again. A quiet biotech lab. An embryo in a glass dish. A voice murmurs. It's just a tweak. A better version of nature. Cut again. A defense conference. Drone footage. Autonomous systems. Red dots on simulated cities. A general taps the screen. This one decides who to kill, without a human in the loop. And in every one of those rooms, someone shrugs and says, "I'm just solving a problem." Pause. Same line. Different century. That's the mirror. And the face staring back isn't Oppenheimer's. It's yours. Because this isn't a story about then. It's not about Nazis, or old bombs, or desert detonations. It's about right now. Right here. You're already in the world he helped build, where speed outruns ethics, where tools are made faster than rules, where the smartest people in the room are still asking the wrong question. Can we? Not, should we? That's the real danger, not the weapon, but the reasoning behind it, because it always starts the same. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm just curious. I'm just building something cool. I'm just solving a problem. But so was he. And here we are. You may never write code that changes the planet. You may never touch uranium or design a kill switch. But that doesn't mean you're safe from the question. Because someday, maybe soon, maybe already, you'll face a moment. It won't look like history. It'll look like you, sitting in a room and deciding something that matters more than you thought. You'll be alone. No goggles, no chalkboard, just a blinking cursor, or a contract to sign, or a silence to break, or not. And you'll hear a voice, not loud, but certain. I just wanted to understand, and maybe it'll sound like yours. That's what he left behind. Not a bomb, not guilt, not glory, but a question, and it's still waiting. So forget what he did. What are you going to do? You think this is physics. It's not. It's a mirror, and now, you're the one standing in front of it.